And he says, you judge according to the flesh, which there's no doubt that we do. Matter of fact, I don't know how we judge according to anything else. But I'm not judging anybody. So Jesus dealt with this woman in particular. What if we weren't responsible for issues as much as we are accountable to and open to and a resource for people? Just something I want you to think about. The next one is that Jesus knew her as his papa did, with respect to her real identity and her created value. And you know what's interesting is her real identity had to be revealed to him by the Father. The beginning of the whole story of the woman caught in adultery starts with Jesus going off in the morning, early morning, out into the mountains. And maybe Papa said, hey, they're going to bring a woman to you. And she's guilty. But this is who she really is. And I don't know that. But I do know that if we spend time for that, and I have a feeling that if we give ourselves to the purposes of seeing real identity manifest in people and real created value redeemed, I bet you God will start talking to us about some of the people that we encounter. And that's what he did. And then third, Jesus engaged with her as the individual that she was. He chose to engage her as you. And he made those Pharisees do the same. It was too much for them. These are just three practical aspects. Don't deal with people as an issue. Deal with them as a person. Don't deal with them as a group that is identified by group behavior or even individual behavior. Let's deal with them as individual people who are sons and daughters made in the image of God. At the very least, made in the image of God. And if you can sense that there is, when the Holy Spirit was poured out at Pentecost, people ask about it, and Peter said, this is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel. And it says, in the last days, I will pour my flesh out, or my spirit out on all flesh. They brought a woman before Jesus, manifesting deeds of the flesh, adultery. Jesus had the ability to look and see that the Spirit of the Father had a claim on that woman. And at Pentecost, undoubtedly that claim would be fulfilled. So that's in our history. It was in his future. I think we can do the same. So anyway, any thoughts, any comments or suggestions? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can see more of you.
There are times that we do judge according to the flesh to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are things, we don't want to lose sight of that.
Right.
We want to guard our family. We want to guard ourselves and keep individuals that we see in the outwardly as someone that we don't want to have enter into our realm, but we can be praying for them, seeing them who they are in Christ.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I've actually got a little example like that in my life. A long time ago, it's a few years ago. Vicky and I bought a revolver, small Ruger revolver, and she wanted a gun that she felt safe with, and comfortable with, and so on, and was going to learn to use. And this particular revolver had some mechanical problems, and I was real discouraged. And I just put it back in its box and forgot about it. And so last week, I got a little file and I started looking at it. And I thought, I bet this is it. It when it was milled inside the way the revolver works, the cylinder was hanging up. And so I just took a little diamond file and I pretended I was a gunsmith. And yesterday morning, after breakfast with the guys, I went home and I grabbed it and some stuff, and I went out into the national forest, got to a safe place, and I shot 15 rounds through it, and it was just smooth as silk. And I was super happy, because I had fixed it, and I should have fixed it years ago. But then it created the kind of thoughts about exactly what you're saying. So Larry, you have this for like a sense of protection, primarily. And wouldn't that put you in a position to have to judge the person on behaviors? They were breaking in your home in the middle of the night. And so, yeah, it's a real issue. I don't have all the answers for it. But I do know that even that degree of twisting that would cause somebody to do something that required that we respond to it, protect, even with violence and lethal force like that, if that was the choice that we made, that doesn't erase the reality, like you're saying, Richard, of the created value, of the purpose, however far off they've got. And so, yeah, that's a great question. How do we live in this world and be responsible for caring for ourselves and our own with things the way they are and not lose sight? Now, here's where my thought is. Start by resisting the temptation to just lump people into categories and ignore them as individuals and think of them only as groups. There's great places to practice that aren't as personally threatening as home invaders. Politics is a tremendous arena that you can use to separate when you're thinking about an individual and when you're thinking about a class of people. And then ask the Lord, could you show me how you see this individual? We've talked about that some through these last months of political turmoil.
I have a question on groups when you can get to it after this.
Yeah, sure. No, but just, that or Lord, am I leaving room for this person to be a you if I were to be put in face-to-face contact with them? That's why I also think we ought to be careful about the judgments we render only on the basis of thinking of people as part of a group, because it's still a judgment and we may still be transgressing with that, opening ourselves to judgment coming in return when we don't need to make that kind of judgment. If somebody's breaking in your house, you got a judgment to make. If you're running against somebody in political office, you have a judgment to make. Or if you got to make a vote, you got a judgment to make. But there's a lot of times where we release ourselves into the habit of judging people on the basis of the flesh, external things, when probably we could just back away from that temptation and nobody would be the worse for wear.
There's other times where, as a body of people, of believers, we're watching out for one another, and you come across relationships that aren't healthy, and you can advise individuals where you see something that's happening. You want to protect them,
yeah,
and so you want to advise them about what you're seeing, because they might not be seeing the same thing because of infatuation or something.
Sure.
So there's protections that God has placed in the body to help us avoid situations that would cause pain in our lives, unavoidable pain in our lives, and wisdom. We're working with God's wisdom in dealing with people. Not that we reject individuals, but we want to safeguard and pray for those individuals that we see that that are nefarious or something.
Maybe there's a good time soon to revisit what judge means, because there may be different versions of what judging means, and Jesus meant one thing, whereas separating and saying this is black and this is green is a judgment, but that's not the same as a
not like setting a judgment against somebody. That's why I wanted to emphasize that katakrino word, setting a judgment.
So
the only before we go to your question, right, or even continue the discussion about judgment, Richard, the only other thing I'd add is just one other factor that I throw into my own life is yes, I totally agree with you there. And there's a chance to be able to pull someone alongside and say, hey, be careful as a relationship or something along those lines. If you have the opportunity to actually treat the other person, the potential perpetrator, as a you as well, in other words, to get in relationship with them, if you have your heart set to do that, and you have your heart set to preserve and to persevere their dignity and their creative value as well, that's when I think we can be the most helpful. And that also takes courage, because it's easy to stand on only one side of a situation like that. But, it's the same thing when somebody comes and wants to talk to you about another person, and you let them talk for a few seconds to realize they're going to bring somebody else in there in a negative light. And you say, well, here, let's go talk to that person together. I just think that that's one of those things. If you can't always do it. I understand that. But I don't know if we're going to find a perfect way to walk that out. But I think if we set our hearts that way, the Lord can help. Jesus was right in the middle between the two factions in this one, and it worked out pretty good for him. Ronnie?
So besides the just don't judge being a challenge in certain situations,
Yeah.
I had a question about God treating people as individuals versus treating people as groups.
Okay.
It appears, at least Old Testament stuff, that groups was a big deal, like the chosen people, the Israelites, they were God's chosen people. So others weren't. And so it appears at that point that they were being treated by God as groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if when it came to resolutions for specific issues, then at that point is when things went to individuals and it wasn't so much of a group, but I don't really know that. So what are your thoughts about, because I can see if I were to treat everybody of one political party as if they were a follower of all aspects of that I'd be treating them as a group, and that wouldn't be necessarily fair.
Mhm.
But I usually start that way, and then I try to dig into what are the specifics that we're having a disagreement with, perhaps. And so there is a mentality that I will start with a group, but then if I can, I'll try to get into the more individualistic
Yeah.
parts.
Okay. So here's my thought on it. And it is a very legitimate question. There's no question that God does things to groups of people. He does things on behalf of groups of people. And so I'm not suggesting by saying that we should treat people as individuals that that doesn't happen. I mean, Jesus sent, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Okay.
It's a pretty big group.
It's a big group. It's a big group. And so there's definitely value and power, and there's no reason to deny that. I think when it comes to the idea of us being agents of helping people be transformed, I think that it's much more difficult to do that thinking in terms of groups than relating to people as individuals. In other words, I don't know how much responsibility I individually have for a whole class of people.
Mm-hmm.
I do think I have the responsibility to choose righteously regarding the issues that identify a group of that people. So I'm not going to, I don't feel compelled to in any way justify pedophilia just because individual pedophiliacs are people. But I want to reserve and be preserved by the grace of God the right that if I get to deal with an individual person with that sickness or that problem or that sin, I want to be able to deal with them in the light of God and see if it's possible to see their value as an individual before God, their created value, and so on. Another way about that is in a very difficult situation. Nancy Cohen was talking, we were talking the other day, we had dinner with a place, and the subject again came up with things like human trafficking. I think we should be on the right side of something like that, sex trafficking and that type of thing. And the right side is to try to prevent it. The right side is to try to bring it to light. The right side is to try to see justice. But the truth of the matter also is that if a trafficker can be encountered as a you and can begin to see the people as yous and not as just a class of people to be abused or whatever or profited off of, that's how you actually solve the problem in a big way.